Okay, so hello everybody. My name is Tariq Rashid, and I'm affiliated with Civilizology LLC. I'll be moderating today's event. We are proud to be co-hosting this think tank event with Farouk El-Baz Center for Sustainability and Future Studies at the British University in Egypt. I'd like first to start by welcoming our honorable speakers. We are fortunate today to bring together world-renowned intellects representing different domains, international organizations, academia, professional societies, and non-for-profit. They come from a broad spectrum of specialization and disciplines: economy, finance, engineering, gender studies, activism, charity, humanitarian work, peace and diplomacy, and spirituality. They are here today to reflect on the future of our world, our human civilization in the post-Covid-19 era. What lessons we have learned so far, and what do they mean for our resilience? Are we going to bounce back to where we were prior to COVID-19, or what we have collectively experienced as a human race will take us to a new path that we yet to explore? Before I give the stage to our first speaker, I want to spare a few seconds to outline the format of our think tank today. We have 9 speakers. Each will have about 9 minutes to share with 6 minutes to share with us his view. Then we'll have open discussion for about 30 minutes. For our live audience on Facebook, I would like to also welcome you. We have had overwhelming response from over 30 countries around the world, so thank you for tuning in now. We will be leaving a room for comments and questions during the open discussion session, the 30 minutes that's left. So the overall thing will be 90 minutes, 60 minutes people just speculate about their views, and then we'll have 30 minutes open discussion. So you are welcome at the time to pose your question and comment when this time comes. So with that, I'd like to introduce our first speaker, Professor Ahmed Rashid. He is the Professor of Architecture Engineering and Director of Farouk El-Baz Center of Sustainability and Future Study at the British University of Egypt, and he is the co-host with me today for this event. So Ahmed, I'll give you the mic.
Okay. First of all, I'm really pleased to welcome all of you from the different 5 continents. I'm also grateful for your acceptance for the invitation to join us today as this event that we at the Farouk El-Baz Center for Sustainability and Future Studies at the British University in Egypt are co-hosting with Civilizology LLC. Over the past 10 years or so, the center has led several national and international initiatives and conferences to reflect on the challenges and the issues related to sustainability and resilience. Among these are 3 international conferences on future intermediate sustainable cities, sustainable mega projects, and a recent conference on green heritage. In addition to the national initiative and campaign in Egypt and the world called Civilization Rights to Build Civilization, funded by the Egyptian Academy of Science and Technology. We also have organized several competitions related to sustainable development and practices in Egypt that propose several scenarios for the Suez Canal region and for sustainable development in Egypt beyond the narrow Nile Valley towards its vast desert of Egypt. 2 years ago, I was invited to give a keynote talk at an international conference on urban resilience in Saudi Arabia, in which I introduced for the first time the concept of civilization resilience, proposing a definition for it that is covering 2 components. The first component is the capacity of civilization to avoid failure or slow down because of acute and chronic shocks, whether economic, environmental, social, institutional. And the second component is the ability to build and increase the capacity of a civilization for learning, adaptation, and growth. In my talk, I share the view of how today's civilization is defined by elements such as smart technologies, effective governance, sustainable practice, innovative society, flourishing economy, and citizen well-being. I am also reflected on how all these elements are connected to each other in very complicated way. That a change in one element would have a complicated impact on the system that defines today's civilization. I proposed a complex system thinking as a vehicle for tackling the issues and for gaining the opportunities and reaching long-term solutions. I have an example of NASA's vision to build human settlements in Mars and how it will be necessary for these elements to be tied together to build a far-reaching, sustainable human community on the red planet. Little that I knew that in 2 years, the coronavirus epidemic would validate this concept of civilization resilience. As we have seen the butterfly effect in action and how the epidemic impacting every aspect in our lives, but also is helping to create a worldwide shared sense of responsibility among people all over the planet. So my position for this is, we think of COVID-19 as a crisis, or we can, and as an experience that united humanity towards a better future, to think about how we organized our lives, used effectively, utilized technology as an opportunity for us to think on how we can bring together all the elements that today's civilization in harmony and to help chart a better path for humanity, both on our planet or a future human invasion of space. I would like today to Egypt international conference titled Civilization Resilience, Chance, Change, Challenge, Cha-Cha-Cha, which is going to hopefully 2021, but when we will plan for that. Thank you for all of you.
Thank you, Ahmed, for your interference. For some reason, you were getting disconnected a little bit, but I hope that was only my thing. But hopefully, people have listened to everything. Our next speaker is Dr. Ellen Kelman. He's a professor of disasters and health at University College London, England. He's affiliated also with the University of Agder in Norway. His overall research interest is linking disasters to health, including the integration of climate change into disaster research and health research. I'm personally been a fan of his research for a good time, and I'm honored actually to introduce him to reflect on what's going on and how he sees the future is shaping. Dr. Kelman.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Tarek, for the opportunity to be here and for organizing this, and to everyone for joining us. It really is an honor and pleasure, and really looking forward to learning so much and to seeing how we work together in order to deal with the really challenging issues and the difficult times which we're going through, because we are in difficult times. But we also must consider how different it is for us compared to the majority of the world's population. Most of us have engaged in extensive international travel. That's now curtailed. Most of us have always expected to be able to buy what we need when we want, to go out for good food with good friends at will. This is now inhibited. Most of us expect ourselves to be healthy and energetic with solid food and drinking water each day, which so far is okay, and hopefully that will continue. But all of these are far from the reality of life experienced by most people in the world. So when we talk about post-pandemic resilience and post-pandemic civilization, for me, it is really asking, what does it mean to be human? What have we done to our society? And what will we do better? Exactly as the first speaker said, what are the opportunities and how can we grasp them? How can we move forward with them? In this sense, to me, resilience is actually the opposite of bouncing back to normal. It's the opposite of returning to normal. Not that we really know what normal means anyway, but do we really want to restore normalcy afterwards by perpetuating the mass inequities across society and the fact that a tiny minority with resources and power make decisions about the lives of everyone else without accountability? In fact, many of these elements created the conditions for a pandemic and always create the conditions for disaster. So we also recognize that people and places, the way they're set up, are actually setting the stage for many more pandemics and many other disasters into the future. So should we be aiming to return to the pre-pandemic state, which set up this disaster in the first place and its consequences? Consider also what's happening in the places which are locked down and which are continuing to be locked down. We must not dispute the thousands of lives saved by lockdown. It really has made a difference. But we also have to think about why we had to have the choice of lots of people dying or lockdown, where that choice came from. But consider, for example, the mental health consequences of being shut up for a long time and not being able to continue with the lives that we expect. Increased stress, increased self-harm, including suicide attempts, increased domestic violence, increased substance use. But all of these are fully treated epidemics within our societies anyway. Being human should mean wanting to solve them, not stigmatizing mental health conditions, not brushing over or excluding everyday violence, and recognizing that we've created life-inflicting compensation mechanisms, which are very much about squeezing humanity out from the worker ants in order to reward those who do not need it. They have so much already, yet they simply want even more. We have constructed systems in which each year the world spends 10 times more on defense budgets, so that's about intimidating and killing people. We spend 10 times more on defense budgets than we do on the international aid system. And notwithstanding all the problems with the international aid system, at least it is trying to help people. Meanwhile, governments are using our tax money to subsidize the fossil fuel industry at perhaps, 2 orders of magnitude more than governments invest in preventing disasters, including pandemics. So what does it mean to be human? Since we are talking about civilizations, well, perhaps it means that we should be civilized. I do a lot of work on disaster diplomacy. Disaster diplomacy, seeing whether or not disasters and dealing with them can create peace. And in general, unfortunately, they do not. We see in this pandemic, people in countries using the virus and the lockdown to either pursue cooperation, which they wanted anyway, or trying to gain advantage over rivals, and to ferment conflict, which is useful for them. It is a sad conclusion that disaster diplomacy simply does not work in the long term. What it comes down to is people using any excuse whatsoever to pursue their predetermined interests. And sometimes those interests are peace, cooperation, and collaboration, which is wonderful to see. At other times, it's simply about creating, continuing, perpetuating conflict without considering the impacts on us all. Even the typical vocabulary of the pandemic shows our baseline. The phrase social distancing was used at first, which is now fortunately being replaced by physical distancing, on the important premise that we must remain as socially close as possible without physical proximity, or speaking of the exit strategy from lockdown, rather than an entrance strategy to a better civilization, to a better humanity. So as a think tank, for me, thinking about resilience and pandemics and lockdown, I would ask us all, what does it mean to be human? What are we aiming for? So please join me on Twitter, join me on Instagram, discuss, propose, recommend, question, but most of all, answer. I'm looking forward to working with all of you because we are all in this together and we certainly need very long-term, very deep, very broad answers. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kilman. Really appreciate it. Also, I'd like to welcome Dr. Mohieldin. He just joined us right now. So soon he'll be actually speaking at the end. Our next speaker is a good friend of mine and a good friend of Bhavani. Is also a professional actress, model, activist, and motivational speaker with a long-standing humanitarian engagement. Welcome, Ms. Gabriela Wright. She is a co-founder of the Never Alone global campaign that provides support for people affected by mental illness, along with raising awareness and tackling stigma. She's also the global Goodwill Ambassador for Sky Power and the honorary president of grassroots charity in Myanmar. She lent her voice to the UN Women and the UN Trust Fund to end violence against women. So Gabriela, I'll give you a stage to share your thoughts about what's going on and how you see the world after COVID-19.
Good morning, everyone. It is so lovely to be part of this think tank. So thank you so much for organizing it. I'm already learning so much. I think the key to life is to be a constant learner. And to start this discussion, my sharing, I think that this is one of the first pandemics, I would say, in this century that we're experiencing together at the same moment in time. And we're experiencing it from different levels of awareness, different levels of society, different levels of economic well-being, different levels of mental well-being, different levels of geography. So it's very interesting because we're experiencing something together. So that has now become our reality. That has now become a common denominator. Now, what do we do with this common denominator? How do we expand and go beyond? How do we change this paradigm? Because right now we're in the middle and we don't know what is coming next. So the question is, what are we going to do with the possibilities that are there? What are we going to do with the tragedies that are there, that are existing right now in our individual well-being and our collective well-being? And the other question is, how are we going to come together again through, I would say, the taboo now of this virus that is creating a lot of fear, just because as a society we're used to being, we are dependent on physical affection, we're dependent on physical interaction, and it's something that we have disregarded because we haven't known how important that is to us. And it's only at this moment in time that we are confronted with our physical loneliness. We might have been confronted with our mental loneliness, but right now we're understanding and we're realizing that actually, we are connected. We are connected in the consumer-driven society that was our old paradigm that has been put on hold. We felt very connected in of being, in our way of consuming, in our ways of interacting with other discussion that is going forth is really the well-being, like our mental hygiene. Is never, and not only our physical hygiene, because that's what we have to do supposedly to protect ourselves from being a contagious vector and vehicle for others, but we have to, with that physical hygiene and that awareness, we're becoming aware that mental hygiene is an utmost necessity to survive, not only as an individual, but survive in seclusion, in isolation, to have resilience, to actually expand resilience, to get through a crisis that, for example, in India, and Dr. Bhavani will be able to speak about that more than I, because I'm not there right now, but in Nepal, areas where we have seen very acute crisis of people dying of hunger and isolated due to other factors because of this, you see. So it's a very interesting new awareness that we're creating. And I think because we are experiencing suffering through different forms, like Dr. Ilyin, you were talking about, you know, there's domestic violence. Rate in France, for example, French, has gone through the roof. You know, people do not want to stay home in this place. And in a strange way, I've been traveling most of my life since I'm 18. I'm now 30, going to be 38. And this is the first time on a personal level where I've had to recreate my home at home. And that is an extreme privilege. That's a beautiful privilege. But, you know, I'm lucky. I'm a single mother. I don't have a partner to deal with. And I don't have an interaction where that will trigger maybe certain traumatic events that some individuals, some women and men have experienced before. You see. So this pandemic, as one so calls it, is really a moment where we all are checking in to our realities. And these realities are very individual, yet at the same time, putting a highlight on domestic violence. They're putting a highlight on mental health. They're putting a highlight on the failing economic system that we've been in. And what it's doing is that we're realizing that we do need each other, that we are all interconnected, that there is an interdependence between us individuals, between us as human beings. And I think it's beautiful because we've been functioning, unfortunately, and I have also been I don't know if you want to call a victim of this or not, but you know, you have to go to work, you have to make a living, you have to show up every day. You've got to show up in a different context for society. And what if you show up for yourself, you know, one day? What if you show up for your own well-being? What if you show up for your wonder in humanity again, you know? And how accountable we become as one actor and vector of change, you see. And how does that really and truly matter? And I think that's an incredible thing, because I think through these moments where we're connecting through this virtual world, which is, you know, technology, we're finding, I would say, a more human side to it, because we need technology right now to connect and to circulate values and new ideas and new paradigms. And I'm not into technology in the sense I'm not a specialist, but I still feel that the internet might be a free world still, to a certain extent. And I think that if we're able to navigate and create the free world through technology right now, while we're addressing our resilience and our sustainability as a human species, as humanity, I think we might be able to really incredibly beautifully challenge ourselves for this new reality. And what else I almost want to kind of open end my little sharing here whilst we listen to the others, professors and doctors and incredible people. Krishnamurti, I love Krishnamurti, he's a wonderful philosopher, but I was pondering on this one thing that he wrote, and he said, the moment I realize I am humanity, that is the greatest of all actions. You see, so it's understanding that the individual is the heart of change, and is at the heart of all movement of humanity. And when we're able to experience humanity through our own being and through our own consciousness, then I think we can really change the world somehow. And this is a wonderful way. We needed a reset. This is a reset. And not only is this a reset, this is a place where we can highlight all the suffering that is happening right now and truly find a sustainable way to go ahead and heal as a collective, but not only heal silently, but be active in our own well-being and voice our collectivity through resilience, sharing, education, and well-being. So there you go. For my morning 8:30 a.m.
Nice speech, Gabriela. Always, she's able to always steal the camera from other.
My job.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Well, our next speakers, we're getting our thoughts from Dr. George Kent. Dr. George Kent is a professor emeritus of political science at the University of Hawaii. He served there for over 40 years. He's also currently affiliated with the University of Sydney in Australia and Saybrook University in California. He worked with several international organizations, including the FAO, UN Children's Fund, the World Food Program, and several non-governmental organizations. He is also on the board of directors of the International Peace Research Association Foundation. He has published lots of research, including significant books on food policy, human rights, and ending hunger. So with that, we are very actually glad to have him. I was telling him that I know his work since his first paper that he published all the way back in the 70s. And I'm honored that he accepted to join us today, even though it's almost 5:30 a.m. in his time in Hawaii. So Dr. Kent, I'll give you the mic.
Thank you very much. I appreciate being here, and I appreciate being with all of you in this setting. I think it's fascinating that we are all interested in sort of not a single issue, but a web of many interconnected issues, very, very messy, very difficult. My particular point of entry for dealing with these big issues has been the hunger problem in the world, which I've been trying to understand and make sense of for decades. And one of my preoccupations has been, while you have a fair amount of discussion about projects to end hunger in the world, I've looked and looked and looked and have yet to see a single serious plan devoted to that purpose, ending hunger in the world. And by a serious plan, I have a very technical definition, and that is, it's a serious plan is one where you expect the outcome to be about ending the world has been serious, because there hasn't been a serious exploration of the causes, the sources of hunger. I mean, food is not difficult to produce. It's not difficult to understand. Most children have at least a decent understanding. Where do we get stuck? Where do we get what's stopping us from ending hunger? Not a difficult concept at all. In a way, I go back to, for my own work, in a way, I go back to my early studies in general systems thinking decades ago with Ludwig Bertalanffy and Norbert Wiener and those founders of that art form. And I particularly appreciate their notice that the whole is composed of parts. The organism is composed of organs, the organs are composed of cells, and so on. It's, again, not overly difficult concepts. And as I look at the hunger problem, I realize that perhaps the root that sustains the problem is people just don't care about one another. They just don't care enough about one another's well-being. Yes, for the people closest to you, we care. We'll do things to go out of our way to make sure they're doing well. Neighbors, a little bit. We might help them out occasionally. But someone on a different continent and the wrong color, why bother? I mean, those are not my people. I care, speaking generally, how people approach these things. people are tribal. So I've developed a new approach in my hunger studies and also my broader work, that there should be increasing focus not on civilizations, but on the units that comprise them, nation states, and within that, more locally, communities. We live in communities much more than we live in civilizations or even nation states. I mean, we live in communities where we interact well with our neighbors or don't, but that's where the opportunities are. And when there's a food crisis or some other crisis, the help shows up with, you know, a bag of food on the doorstep or something like that. I think the solutions need to be found there. This is my way of saying that in work on, it's very difficult to fix civilizations, just like it's difficult to fix a car. You can fix the subsystems in a car after the appropriate diagnosis. That's different from fixing a car. So, okay, let's fix civilizations, which, as some people have said, is a good idea, a good proposal that we should have a civilization. We should work on looking at the component elements and making them work well. So one of the challenges I put out in my writing and other contexts, what would you, if you were to create an entirely new community, if you had the opportunity to do that, perhaps with a small group of like-minded people, how would you design that community to ensure that there would be no hunger ever of anyone? It's an interesting challenge. My concern here is, how can we even begin to talk about ending world hunger if we can't answer the question, how do you end it locally? I mean, think of the hubris of saying, I'm going to fix civilization when you don't know how to fix things locally. So we have to be drawing to some degree on systems thinking. We have to find the pieces we can fix. And what you could be that you end up fixing the whole by fixing the parts internally and in the relationships among them. This is what led to my book called Caring About Hunger. My diagnosis is basically that we don't care enough, and the way to address the issue is to find ways to test and strengthen the caring at the level of local communities. So I want to suggest that this community level thinking should be a part of the strategic thinking of this project. That's the main point I want to make.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kent. Really appreciate your input here, and I think I'm seeing already in Facebook a lot of comments and feedback on the people in the chat. I'll just ask you guys to hold until we got to the open discussion, because I'd like to share, like in the open discussion, if you have any comments, I can share it with our guest here, and they can correspond to that. So thank you so much for tuning in. Our next speaker is Dr. Ali Sulaiman. Dr. Ali Sulaiman is a world-renowned economist and the former CEO and general manager of the Islamic Cooperation for the Development of the Private Sectors. In addition to his academic careers that span several universities in the Middle East and USA, he has an extensive public service record, including service as the Senior Undersecretary Ministry of Economy and International Cooperation in Egypt, and the Undersecretary of Ministry of Economy and International Trade. And he was also a senior economic advisor for the Minister of Planning in Saudi Arabia, among so many other positions he has performed. So, we are honored to have him today. Dr. Sulaiman, I'd like to give you the mic to reflect on how you see the world and the economy of the world after what's going on here. Thank you.
Hello, how is everybody? I'm very excited to be here with you today. I want to thank Dr. Ahmed Rashid and for the moderator, Dr. Farouk Rashid, and for the very illustrious groups that we are talking together today. Actually, Corona was a very big surprise for the whole global system, should we say. And I want to share the same ideas of my colleagues in saying this is a chance to pause, to think, to consider this pandemic as a chance to review the way we conduct our lives, the way we conduct our relations with other countries and with each other. Definitely, there are big hopes for maybe becoming more harmonious, more collaborative, more coordinating as a globe, as countries. Some features are encouraging. We see some countries extending some help to others. Perhaps the doctors from Cuba going to other countries, from Russia going to Italy, from Egypt we are sending supplies to other countries. So all of these things are very good. But in the same time, we are seeing aspects of competition, of struggle. Medical supplies which were destined for country A are being snatched by country B. Pharmaceutical companies making use of this crisis to charge higher prices or gouge higher prices. But in any case, it's a chance for us to reconsider really how are we dealing with each other as countries in a global system. We can talk, I will talk some more maybe about our point of view from developing countries. We discovered in Egypt, for example, belatedly, although it was clear to many of our specialized people, that we are not spending enough on health. We are not spending enough on health infrastructure. We don't have good infrastructure in immunization, in developing new drugs, research, and so on. We are very dependent on other countries for our supplies. I think this crisis will impel us to think more in terms of we cannot become a member in an international community without being stronger ourselves. We have to develop our own pharmaceutical industry more. Egypt is lucky in a way that we perhaps produce 90% of our needs, but we still have to strengthen our capability as a drug industry or pharmaceutical industry. We have also to strengthen our ability to develop immunization and other measures to protect us from this corona and other viruses. Another aspect that we need to consider is the social system we are living in. We have discovered that if you put people in isolation, if you prevent them from going out, you may protect them from a virus, but you are actually killing them by depriving them from their livelihood. Many people go out every day to make a living, and without a good social system, you cannot enforce in good, shall we say, in good conscience, you cannot impose isolation or social distancing if the man himself has to go out and work in a social system. So the luxury of living in Denmark is understood, but in India, Egypt, perhaps even Africa, you cannot really impose a system of isolation. A third thing that we really need to think about is the health insurance system. We see people in America and in Germany and other developed countries, they go to the hospital, they are being taken care of. They don't have to worry about paying for it. This is a luxury that is not available in many of our countries. So, in a nutshell, to consider this crisis is a way for us to pause, to consider, to think, to rethink our social system, to introduce better, they call it safety nets, better health insurance, a program to ensure that people will get enough to eat, as Dr. Kent was saying, as well as we have another issue for many of our countries where we have a lot of migrant workers. We have migrant workers in the Gulf countries and even in other European countries. And these people are not able to make money anymore. And the question is, how can we repatriate them, or how can we extend our social system or social protection to these people? So in a nutshell, I'm very grateful for this opportunity. I want to thank Dr. Ahmed for this. We have to rethink our civilization, and we have to think about modalities of collaborating together. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sulaiman, for your input. I'm sure that will be already, I see a lot of feedback. I have to go to the chat and just try to get some of the comments and share it with you after we finish our speakers. Our next speaker is the one and only Dr. Bhavani Rao, and she is a very good friend of a lot of people here, me and Gabriella. She served as the UNESCO India only UNESCO Chair in Gender Equality and Women Empowerment. And she's also the director of the AMMACHI Labs and the Center of Women's Empowerment and Gender Equality at Amrita University. Her academic and humanitarian career are very inspiring, dedicated to participatory action research, education, implementation that focus on the mapping of vulnerability of women in underserved community, especially in rural India, but also in other places in the world. She is a principal investigator of several projects funded by organizations such as the United Nations Democracy Fund, the Indian Ministry of Skills Development and Entrepreneurship, and the National Skill Development Corporation in India. Dr. Bhavani, I give you the mic.
Thank you, Tarek, for the introduction. Hello, everyone. And I'm glad that the mood was set into a slightly more practical by the previous speaker. And so I would like to talk something that's a little more tangible, because our work is very much in the present. And while we're thinking of the future, we have to act in the present. And so would like to hone in where we are now and what do we need to do the most to make sure that where the ideas where we want to go are met in our actions right now. And as Dr. Ken said, it's so important. What happens in other parts of the world is so relevant to us. As our chancellor put it, is like if you are on a 10-story building and you're on the 10th floor, and if there's a fire at the bottom of on the bottom floor, it's going to get to you at some point of time. So what's happening in other parts of the world is just as relevant to us. The idea of community, but the idea of that what happens in one place is such a huge impact on us is something that we keep in mind. And holding that as a base, I'd like to just quickly take you to some of the very key things that we have been following very closely in our work in rural India. Tarek told that most of my work is in rural India and with women in rural India. So the lessons that I will take from there, I hope will be relevant to the rest of the world. I think mostly they are. Along with Dr. Tarek, we have come up with a framework to actually map women's vulnerabilities using systems thinking. And I think there's a lot of people from that philosophy in this group. So I don't have to go into the details of that. But the idea is, how do you look at women's vulnerabilities on an individual, on a household and community levels? And I'm just pulling from some very high level things that I've seen happen across the world. One is, of course, domestic violence in households, which Gabriella touched upon. This is something that is coming across all cultures. It's ubiquitous. And the question is, how can we make homes safe if this is going to be a repetitive pattern? I mean, we already have this as a vulnerability, but this really exacerbates the vulnerability. So how can we keep home safe? Seems to be one of the most important topics that become, not just for women, but also for children. This is a very important thing. What kind of opportunities do we have for these women? What is the kind of access they have to those opportunities? What kind of awareness do they have of the fact that there are certain opportunities that are there and how they can actually access them? And you come to the fact is that especially in rural India, you don't have a lot of those things in place. Like you said, in France, domestic violence, they're being aggressive about how they address it, but those kind of opportunities are not there for many parts of the world, and there's something that you really have to look into. Second is on a household level, another important thing that's coming up is education of the girl child, whether it's due to financial constraints or social cultural dimensions. There's a lot that is going to impact the education of the girl child. If the family doesn't have enough money because of the financial crisis to educate their children, they're going to prefer the male child over the female child. What are the things that we're going to put into place, make sure that the female child's education is not going to? This is a huge thing. These are all very big topics, but they stand at a very precarious point right now. The third thing, and I'm going really fast, is our work with self-help groups. These are huge organizations that are in play in places like in India, Bangladesh. A lot of the informal economy depends on these self-help group activities. And we found that comes to a grinding halt in a lockdown, because women are dependent on meeting together and taking decisions together. So when you freeze that kind of movement and they don't have anything else to fall back on, how are they going to go about their economic activity at these kind of situations? And these are three of the very major points that we kind of, I mean, there's so much, but just from this and just lessons that I thought really need to come across is one, is that you have somehow technology enablement has to happen at a very, very grassroots level. For rural women in India, for girl children, this is something that is almost fundamental. Major part of the access is going to come through technology, especially during lockdown, and that should be in the hands of every individual. Second is you have to take men along. You cannot underestimate the amount of awareness that needs to go out into families about educating their children equally, to men about treating their women right. This is another thing that has to happen at an individual. Very strong awareness campaigns against domestic violence and child sexual abuse and children's abuse in general should happen. Right now, and the whole strategy the focus should be around the family as a unit, because that's kind of how things have been contained right now. And if that system is not secure, then everything is going to fall apart, no matter what we do. And so very strong ways to address the family as a unit. And if I would like to end on a slightly positive note, there's also a lot of speculation that most of the countries that did really very well in addressing the COVID crisis were all led by women leaders. And our organization is also led by a woman leader, and she did an amazing job at keeping this huge community really safe. And we've not had one single instance of COVID in our community, even though we're like right next to all kinds of hotspots and we're a very exposed community. So there's something to be said about it. Now, it may be that women have an instinctive parallel conversation always in their mind about the well-being of the child, no matter what they're doing. They're always thinking about their child somewhere in the background. And maybe that instinctively it kicks in somehow subconsciously, and therefore maybe the women leaders also consider the country as their children. And maybe there's something to be said for women leadership. Now, this is not proven. I'm sure there are plenty of really good male leaders who have been doing a fantastic job in their countries, but the record, let's see. We have Germany, we have New Zealand, Taiwan, Denmark, Iceland, Norway, Finland, and our institutional leaders. So something to be said about women leadership. I don't know if I've taken 6 minutes because I really tend to talk a lot. But the idea is that maybe there's something that can be done to actually encourage women's leadership. And maybe these are the ways forward in terms of gender and COVID. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Bhavani. When it comes to women, you can speak faster than me. I'm impressed. So, because she always actually teases me that I speak very fast, but now I discovered that she can actually beat me in the speed. So, thank you so much. I know that you're very enthusiastic, and I really respect your point of view. So far we have heard from the peace researchers, from the epidemiology and health disaster, from the economy, from the humanitarian, and now we start actually hearing from the engineers. So our next speaker is Dr. Ahmed Alla-Eldin. He is the director and regional chair of the American Society of Heating, Refrigerator and Air Conditioning Engineers, region at large. He has a PhD from Princeton University in mechanical engineering, and he has been a veteran for so many years, over a quarter century. And I think we know a lot that actually has a big interest in sustainability and green in technology. So I'll give him the stage. I know it is he's fasting, and probably I'm not sure now. Did you break your fast or not yet?
Just a few minutes ago.
Okay.
While you are talking, I was just getting.
Okay.
No
Okay, so I'll give you the mic then so now that you're able to have some energy, I would say lucky you. We still are fasting here, so I'll give you the mic. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm really very glad and pleased to be with this unique team talking today, and I hope I will be in the 6 minutes, hopefully. When we talk about COVID-19 and how much it caused the crisis globally, actually it shows us weaknesses like the health system, lack of education, lack of cooperation. Many countries now resetting their priorities to minimize the losses, let us say. When we talk about COVID-19 and how it affects our planet, if we look to the SDGs, the 17 SDGs, we can see that it will put us in a firm path to dealing with the global health risks and emerging infection diseases in the future. Even at this stage in the pandemic, we cannot deny the fact that crisis is teaching us as a global citizen all over the world. We have learned a lot from this unpredictable event or unpredictable pandemic. Again, I'll talk about the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which will help humanity to build inclusive and sustainable economics that are more resilient in facing pandemics, like climate change and environmental issues, a lot of aspects actually related to this. As ASHRI, let us talk about ASHRI now and see that we, as soon as this matter happened in the world, ASHRI made a task force committee, and we try to study what's going on, what can we do. You know, ASHRI is a research-based organization, non-profit organization, and it's taking care of the HVAC&R, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, refrigeration, cold chains, environment, green building. So this task force come out with the position documents. The HVAC&R systems cannot control all the airflow completely to prevent dissemination of the infection, aerosol, or disease transmission. So the impact of the HVAC depends on the source and location. The strength of the source distribution of the related aerosol or droplet size or air distribution, temperature, relative humidity, is this all affecting the things. So we make a quick study because, you know, the time was short to see what can we come out with this study. There is a multiple modes and circumstances under which disease transmission occurs. Thus, the strategies for prevention and risk mitigation require collaboration among designers, owners, operators, industrial hygienists, and infection prevention specialists. The healthcare facilities, you know, now always we are talking about the hospitals and the isolation, a lot of issues. ASHRI was doing this long time ago. We have several standards, 62.1, 62.2, and 170. We have several standards about healthcare facilities and the criteria of ventilation to mitigate the airborne transmission. Because as you see, in some countries, there was a huge infection by the dissemination of the infection from one to the other in the public and even in the offices. Healthcare facilities, most infection control intervention are geared at reducing direct or indirect contact transmission of pathogens. This intervention for limiting airborne transmission emphasize personal education and surveillance of behaviors such as hand hygiene and compliance with checklist protocols, and have largely been restricted to a relatively small list of disease from pathogens that spread only throughout the air. Infection aerosol can be disseminated through buildings by pathway that include air distribution system and interzones airflow. Various strategies have been found to be effective at controlling the transmission, including optimizing airflow patterns, directional airflow, zones pressurization, dilution ventilation, in-room air cleaning system, general exhaust ventilation, and many other things. We are all gathering our efforts with the researchers, and we are focusing now in ASHRI and all the other related organizations to come out with a modified and updated researches to help and the solution to support our sustainable development and civilization resilience. I think I'm less than 6 minutes. I just go very fast because I have a very big details, but I don't want to go deeply in technical details. I don't need people to be bored from what I'm saying. So thank you very much. And really, it was my great pleasure to be with this wonderful team, amazing team. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Alla-Eldin. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. So thank you for very, very engineering. So we now go to humanitarian non-for-profit organization, especially in the context of Latin America. We have Miss Christina. I hope I can pronounce the last name correct this time. Blackie. She was recently appointed as the executive director of the Resource Foundation based in New York City. So she's in the middle of the action there, but she has been working with the Resource Foundation for several years. She ran different programs and she led several phases of program development, from design to implementation to reporting and impact assessment. She has experience managing regional initiatives in bringing Africa-based programming to Latin American contexts. She has a degree from Villanova University in Pennsylvania and conducted field work with local non-for-profit sectors in Ecuador before bringing her international development career to the United States. Christina, welcome. This is my first time to meet with you in person, so I'm happy to do that. And I'll let you now take the mic. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to participate. My name is Christina Malachi. I'm the Executive Director of the Resource Foundation. We are a 501c3, a nonprofit organization based in New York City. However, our focus really is on Latin America, the Caribbean, and Canada. So we work on connecting the private sector here in the US. So think corporate foundations, family foundations, and individuals with locally led nonprofit organizations and social enterprises across 29 countries, again, Canada, Central America, South America, and the Caribbean. That network, or that's how we generally talk about those organizations that we work with locally, our network is comprised of over 370 organizations at this point in time, and we have been extremely active in the COVID-19 response programming, and really my team has been incredible working to reach out to all of our partners in waves to understand what does COVID-19 mean for them in their communities, and are they engaged in any type of local response programming to really help fill gaps in any type of needs that they may be seeing locally. So really quickly, I'll go through, what are we seeing in terms of COVID-19? I think similar to what some of my fellow panelists have already mentioned, we're seeing that this is a situation that certainly not only affects the health sector, although we can think of the pandemic as a health issue. So in addition to a shortage of medical supplies or infrastructure concerns regarding the health sector in general, we're also seeing incredible effects or considerations, challenges related to high unemployment, food scarcity, domestic violence and mental health issues, comorbidities due to high rates of diabetes and hypertension, issues with proper hand washing and hygiene, education. I think the list can go on, but I think even these few examples really show the widespread increased demand on nonprofit services at the local level, while further illustrating the diverse yet integrated nature of all of these challenges that we're seeing. Of course, my focus is more on Latin America, the Caribbean, and Canada, but I think more broadly on a global scale. We've seen an outpouring of support for relief efforts right now. However, what I really wanted to get into during these 6 minutes today as part of the panel was, I think the situation sparks a larger question on what does philanthropy look like moving beyond COVID-19? And are there considerations in the current climate that will influence what, strategic philanthropy or international development, what that may look like moving forward? So again, my experience is certainly geared towards Latin America, but I think it can be, apply on a more global scale. But what, in my opinion, and really what I think and hope will be happening as we move forward, is a more strategic and expanded discussion that will include 5 key points. So that's what I wanted to touch on today. Resilience, collaboration, NGO sustainability or nonprofit sustainability, long-term commitment, and flexible funding. So I think it's worth mentioning that some organizations and funders, especially ones that the Resource Foundation has been so fortunate to work with in the past, we know that there are already individuals and groups and think tanks that may be looking at approaching development with these factors in mind. However, I think they're going to become more central to that discussion, or I hope that they will become more central to that discussion moving forward. And I think because COVID-19 has been such a shared experience, again, as my fellow panelists have mentioned, I would imagine a shared motivation in moving forward to address the challenges that COVID has really worked to expose. So first and foremost, I think this one trickles down into the other points that I'll talk about, this focus on resiliency within the context of development and philanthropy. You know, what does that actually mean? And is there an opportunity to build and think about not only resilient communities, but resilient organizations? So from my perspective, again, I'm thinking about, in particular, nonprofit organizations working specifically at the local level. And I think at TRF, at the Resource Foundation, we think about resilience in terms of preparedness or being proactive. You know, can we better prepare for different shocks to the system? And then, of course, you know, reactive as well. How can we recover from different shocks or disturbances? So I think that's the first one. Second, I think we're going to see an increased focus on collaboration. So again, COVID has shown how integrated all of these challenges are, and resilience building really must go beyond standalone siloed projects. So I would expect and hope for more discussion on building out networks among not only nonprofit organizations, but other stakeholders as well. So like governments or the private sector. So a really quick example that actually one of my team members was on the phone with one of our local nonprofit partners in Jamaica recently, and we had a real tangible example of how kind of a crisis situation can really create a foundation for these larger discussions. And our partner in Jamaica shared that the Jamaican government is actually creating and setting up this network for nonprofits to be able to easily get in touch with each other, share ideas, and work together on different response projects. So I think that's something that's certainly, you know, it's a very simple example, but something spurred on by the current pandemic that surely will have benefits far beyond the crisis itself. The third thing that I think will become more central to discussion is the topic of nonprofit sustainability. So will we see an increased interest and excitement among funders to support projects whose sole focus may be on training the nonprofit organizations themselves? And I think so things like diversifying funding streams or positioning. And the idea is that, you know, by addressing the organization itself and strengthening the organization, can we not only support or focus on, you know, making one project more sustainable or more effective, but can we focus on, by focusing on the organization, can we make all of their programs, all of their projects more effective, more sustainable, more impactful over time? So the Resource Foundation was very fortunate to be able to be engaged in an initiative where nonprofit capacity building was the project itself. It was an incredible experience. And we've seen that nonprofit cohort that was created through this program has now is really active in speaking with each other, supporting each other in navigating the COVID-19 crisis. The fourth thing I wanted to mention was a larger dialogue around the need for longer term funding commitments. So building, I think it would be the recognition that building resilience requires changes in behavior, perspectives, or processes, and that those things take time. So there's traditionally, or at least in my experience, traditionally there's a heavier focus on short-term projects. So even things, 6 months to a year, I feel like a lot of projects we work with are a year long. Are there ways that we can look at working with funders to be more open, or to really consider short, medium, and long-term funding opportunities? If we can commit to longer term or even multi-year projects, are we then able to be more impactful in the work that we're able to do? And the final thing I wanted to touch on was that I think all of these adjustments and how we think about grant making and development leads to a larger question, again, on flexible spending. And can programmatic funding also include flexibility so that nonprofits are able to adapt and respond to local needs as they arise? So can we look again at those funding opportunities to really build into those opportunities a way that organizations, I think with certain guidelines, but so that organizations are able to feel that they can really address the needs that they're seeing on the ground in real time during the implementation of the projects. So this is quite clearly, in 5 or 6 minutes, only the tip of the iceberg. However, I'd like to leave you with a few key takeaways in closing. One, expect that resiliency, both in terms of preparedness and recovery, will become an even larger part of development discussions. 2, COVID has further highlighted the integrated, connected nature of development issues and the need to consider longer-term commitments in strategic grant making. And finally, with an increased focus on training and flexible funding for nonprofit partners, we can work as a global team to build not only resilient communities, but resilient organizations as well. So thank you again to Dr. Tarek and his team for inviting the Resource Foundation to participate in this panel. And we are very excited at what opportunities the future may hold. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Christina. Really lots of things to digest. I know that you guys are doing great work in the Resource Foundation. I myself experienced working a little bit in a small volunteering project about the Venezuelan refugees back in the summer, and it was amazing. So I really appreciate it. So now we have our big star, and it is an honor to introduce him and myself, Dr. Mhamoud Mohieldin. He is the United Nations Special Envoy on financing the 2030 Agenda. He's also the former Minister of Investment in Egypt, and for the past 10 years, he served as the World Bank Group Senior Vice President for the 2030 Development Agenda and for the United Nations Relation and Partnership. Dr. Mhamoud, of course, his CV is, is way beyond somebody like me to introduce it, but I think, I don't need to spend much longer since we're running out of time. I'll give the mic to Dr. Mhamoud Mohieldin. Dr. Mhamoud.
Well, thank you so much for this generous introduction that may increase the expectations of the rest of the panel and the listeners beyond what I'm going to deliver. I listened really carefully to all of you, and apology that I joined late by a few minutes, but it's one of those very few engagement that one has to take lots of notes, given your great exposure to different things, different backgrounds, and very insightful comments and suggestions. So thank you so much for that. I learned a lot. In the remaining few minutes, I'd like to share with you some reflections on what we are in today and possible directions for a better future if we have really some good collective action in the different areas that you touch upon today. First, I think we need to realize some facts that, well, I totally agree that this current crisis had a kind of a democratization effect, that we are all exposed to it. But definitely the impact of this crisis and its accompanying crises have been really different depending on our initial conditions. The impact on the poor, the underprivileged is huge, and we shouldn't really undermine that. And if you take it just from the basic areas of agreement on how to protect ourselves, the signs everywhere, from developing to developed countries, please stay at home and wash your hands with water and soap. It looks like a simple thing, but if you take into the details, staying at home is a privilege for many people, especially for those who are depending on what they can really get on a daily basis to feed themselves and their families. While many of us can really have that, but many people in the informal sector around the world, and even in the formal sector, with the latest figure coming from the ILO They started by saying 25 million people are, that was a few weeks ago, are likely to lose their jobs. Then they increased the number to 195. That was 10 days ago. And then the latest figure a couple of hours ago was 300 million people exposed to losing their jobs if this crisis continues further. Staying at home is a luxury, as we know, not just for the fact that people are depending on what they can gain on a daily basis, but the fact that 1 out of 7 people are living in a slum around the world. And if you check the developing countries, that could be 1 out of every 3 persons. So that is the home. And then access to water is a privilege that is denied to 3 billion people around the world. And talking about add soap to the water, if you are recognizing that 780 million people before the crisis were suffering from extreme poverty. So that kind of mix of water and soap is another kind of luxury. So when we are trying to provide our assistance and social protection, either from government or the private sector through some solidarity programs or through the great work the philanthropists are doing and the NGOs, I think this issue of prioritization needs really to be put into consideration. Then we have this dilemma that it's very rarely really to see that protection of life is in contradiction of the protection of livelihood. That is not normally the case. They should really come together. You protect your life, you work, you protect your livelihood. Unless you are in a war zone or in a country that is suffering from civil war. I saw that myself in my previous work and now with the UN as well, in countries which are suffering from conflict. While we don't really have that everywhere, but there are countries which are still suffering from conflict. And we are in this kind of contradiction. If you want really to work, you are exposing your health to some trouble. And if you are staying at home and you don't really have your paycheck coming regularly, you have this challenge. I'm following some interesting guidelines that come from different governors where I'm staying here in the United States. And the best of them I saw came from the governor of Pennsylvania. It's about how we should be data-based when we are opening up, that each community and county need to see the number. If you are less than 50 infected or 50 cases to the 100,000, you can consider opening that. But when you open, there are 5 conditions that could be really very hard to meet when you come to issues related to testing, tracing, and treating. Pennsylvania may have the access, but different places around the world may not. But these are the guidelines. When you close the system, you close it with a hammer. And when you open it, you need to be careful as opening it with a kind of a scalpel, as they say. Having said that, to what extent this kind of a problem that we are living in is basically because of a kind of an external shock, or is it basically at least partially our responsibility? Definitely it is our responsibility. There have been many reports warning the system, including a famous report. If you didn't see it, please have a look at it. It's called A World at Risk, published by an independent panel of scholars, policymakers, including the former Prime Minister of Norway, who used to be the former head of WHO, with her as a co-chair, the Secretary General of IFRC. It's called The World at Risk, and it makes a very nice description that when it comes to epidemics and pandemics, we are between neglect and panic because we are not prepared. And that, funny enough, this panel, if there's anything funny about it, that this panel was established after the Ebola crisis that hit 3 African countries. And that was established by WHO and World Bank to get the lessons. And in September 2019, they said, we are more likely than not, we are going to be at risk of a major pandemic. These guys are not fortune tellers. These guys are scientists and policymakers. So there is an issue here. Yes, you cannot prevent it, but you can really minimize the likelihood of exposure. And here it's not an issue of developing economy or an advanced economy. We can see the great discrepancy, but even within the advanced economies. And I share the comment of the good women leaders and their good management. And I think I don't just attribute it to the women leaders, I attribute it to the societies and communities that elected those women leaders. So it's a reflection of something good at large about the leadership and about the process to elect people based on their merits, not based on their gender or their ethnicity or color. Coming then to the serious action then, what we can really do. Crises have three certain dynamics, and I'm more specialized in financial areas, but this is not really a financial one. This is a human crisis more than an economic crisis, an economic crisis more than it is a financial crisis. And we need to take it on those three levels. Having said that, all crises reveal three things, or actually have three things. One is revealing factors. They tell us about our weakness and strength. And I think we can really check it from the rediscovery of family and community, which has been always neglected even when we talk about sustainability and sustainable development. We normally talk about public-private partnership, community, or the great mind of India, Professor Raju Rajan, put it as the third pillar, the missing pillar. I was surprised coming from him. He's a great international macroeconomist, but he focused on this third pillar, another beautiful reference that you may need to check because it has some serious implications on how to deal with matters. Of course, he didn't deal with this crisis, but he was dealing with the role of community in bridging gaps between government and the private sector and how can they fix things in a better way. The second dynamic is basically beyond the revealing factors about weakness and strength, is basically the acceleration effect. What we see as we are having our meeting today, this kind of technology was available, but it had only millions of users. Now it has hundreds of millions of users. I hope this kind of access could be for all, but as there are some technological dividends, there is some sort of technological divide. And this is another area of inequality that we may need to be taking care of. And unfortunately, when we talk about poverty and inequality, women suffer more across the board. Check poverty, check inequality. The suffer will be more from women and then the younger generation and the female among the younger generation. So when you are trying to do a corrective action, we need really to deal with that. So beyond the revealing factors of a crisis and the accelerating factor of a crisis, and the acceleration could be positive and negative, the third is basically about the third dynamic, which is about creating new things, which we're not aware of. And some of them could be good and some of them could be bad. But we need to be prepared for that as well. So I like the reference to that we listen to when it comes to some good things, including sustainability, taking SDGs seriously. But we have an issue because SDGs are very useful, starting with ending poverty as SDG 1 to partnership as SDG 17. And for the good emphasis we listen to in the case of hunger, there is SDG 2 about elimination of hunger. And we already have 820 million people suffering from hunger and 780 million people suffering from extreme poverty. And unfortunately, the initial estimates by Oxfam and others telling us that at least 500 million more are going to be added to that, despite the efforts that we are conducting today. So there is going to be more work needed from public sector, the private sector, and the community-based kind of interventions. But to get out from all of that, we need really to have a good answer to that big question raised in a book by Skidelsky and Skidelsky about, and it has a provocative title, How Much is Enough? Because if we have the resources, but they are not prioritized properly. We have, as mentioned, we don't really have a problem when it comes to food because fortunately, this year, unlike 2008, 2009, or 2011, we don't really have agricultural crisis or food production crisis. And the fuel prices are at its lowest. It's basically the logistical impediments and the incomes that are not that equal, that are preventing many people to have adequate access to the necessities like food. So I think in the future, we need really to consider, and with this kind of a big question, how much is enough? And the justice criteria and the solidarity criteria for getting things done, we need really to consider 3 areas of work. Investment in human capital. We saw the price of negligence in one area of human capital, which is health. What will be the implication if we are neglecting the rest, like decent education, quality education, to survive in the new world? We saw the problems in neglecting one SDG, which is SDG 3. It's a reminder that climate change and environment, SDG 13, is Sustainable Development Goals 13, 14, and 15. While I'm seeing the sky nicely from here, I normally see it in Washington, I cannot complain, but I have been really listening to songs of birds that I have never seen. Perhaps I may stay much more staying at home now, but my wife's saying, well, this is new discovery. I've never seen these creatures for many, many years here. But we need really to protect the environment and climate while we are maintaining our work. It's like celebrating having no accidents because there is no traffic. No, we need to have the traffic and prevent accidents. It's like celebrating, I was on the news here, NPR, that for the first time in many, many March months, we didn't have accidents of random shooting by lunatics to schools. Yes, thank you so much, because people staying at home and there are no schools. But we need that to come back without shooting. So how to maintain the decent life while we are resuming the kind of work and life. It will be new life. I cannot say that we are going to be returning to that life that we left before COVID. This is going to be a line of division between what's had been before it and what will be after it. So invest in human capital, invest in infrastructure, including digital infrastructure as well, the DNA, the new DNA, data networks and artificial intelligence. If you don't have a command of them as a society, you will be losing a lot. And finally, investing in resilience, in the climate change. I listened to some comments on that, in the environment, and investment as well in the social protection systems. Unfortunately, not all of the 200 million as of last week, or the 300 million as estimated today by ILO, are going to be returning to work. And we were warning ourselves from the implications of a good thing, which is the fourth industrial revolution, but it may have many victims until they get trained and transit from a job to the other. So you need really to think seriously of how to protect in a new social contract the vulnerable, including the young, including the consideration for a universal basic income to deal with that. I know that is being popularized strongly recently, but we need really to see it could be a good idea. We may not take it all, we can take part of it. How to fund it? I think it's again about prioritizing budgets and partnerships going forward. So I think it's one of those meetings and engagements that I have been very privileged to be a listener more than a speaker. And I look forward really to engage with you further, focusing perhaps more, not just on the diagnosis, because most of us can be good at that, but I can see in what you said today, it's not just highlighting a problem, but each one of you, which I'm grateful to you all, had some sort of hints on how can matters get better through different ways of getting things done. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Mohieldin, and I think you summarized almost everything the other, we're talking about, like, Dr. Kent, for example, was talking about, the community grassroots actions that need to start with, and also system thinking. Christina was talking about the perils, the different. At the end of the day, everything is connected to everything else, and it is not only about the social well-being, and the technology, but also has to do with the effective governance, the proper good economy, sustainable environment, they all come in one harmony and they are connected to each other. And one change in one thing, we can see basically the effect of everything else. So with that, we have only, technically speaking, we have 3 minutes left. But I wanted also to give a stage for, at least for our audience here, or for our speakers to comment on each other, maybe in the next 5 minutes. And then I wanted really, we have had lots of nice feedback and, in the chat here, but I think there is no chance to get all over them. So maybe we can hold on the feedback right now, and we can just basically ask my audience here, like my speakers here, any of our 9 distinguished speakers, if they would like to comment or say one final word, maybe in 3 words, what do you think the future should look like? So, would you like to do that? Dr. Ali would like to talk. So
yes, I will talk, and then I will leave you directly to go and have my iftar of Ramadan. Anyway, I want to thank you and Dr. Ahmed for this forum. I am very thrilled by the quality and level of discussion. I think it will be very important to think of sustainable way of keeping this dialogue going. Definitely with illustrious figures like Gabriella or Bhavani or Dr. Kent or everybody, Dr. Mhamoud, Mohieldin. I think we can find a more solid forum to pursue this further. Otherwise, thank you very much, and I look forward to additional discussion in the future.
Oh, thank you so much. Bhavani, you have a question, so would you like to say your questions? Because I didn't understand your question, so maybe you can express it better than me.
I was just wondering if anybody in the panel would comment on the universal basic income.
Hi, this is George Kent. May I respond? Do you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
I think universal basic income is very important to at least explore. One of my colleagues says we should begin thinking about maximizing unemployment. Maximizing unemployment. The world is very rich. And very exploitative. People can live modestly and live well on very little income. There are alternative models for living together. And I think we should test out some of those models. If we can't do it at the global level, if we can't do it at the national level, do experiments with it at the community level. Guaranteed minimum incomes. I think it's possible and worth testing.
Sure, and if I may jump in there, then I think this is actually one of the fundamentals we need to look at. But I'd also say, what is the point of income? What is the point of cash and trying to accumulate this aspect of wealth, as opposed to the other aspects of wealth, which many of the panelists have mentioned? So is it really about income to have money in the bank or under the mattress? Or is it about ensuring that, exactly as George was saying, people are not hungry? Is it about, exactly as the final speaker said, that people can wash their hands with soap? So universal basic something, but maybe it's universal basic life or universal basic livelihood, or to use Gabriella's powerful word, universal basic home. Because so much comes down to exactly what we're saying. How do we be part of ourselves, part of our families, part of our communities? So much comes down to home. Money can buy a house, but can it really buy a home? Thank you.
Very insightful. Any other comments?
That was beautiful. That was really beautiful. And I think what we could add to that is that I really love the word humanity, because it was made for a reason. We are all parts of humanity, and every single color and aspect and subtle reality that we are as humanity, as India, as Nepal, as Burma, as American, as Britain, as French, we are all part of that humanity. And I think when we get to that universality and the realization that I am everyone, the I am becomes a universal vector and vehicle to experience one another. And however we can bring that into a tangible reality, I think that however we can experience empathetic action, then I think we can really embody the solution, because we are the solution. I truly believe that. When I say we as a collective, together with our minds and with our actions and with our empathetic experience of one another, which ultimately is a form of compassion. And there you go.
Can I say something? I have no words to say. The civilization resilience, it was a reality, and we have, through the virtuality, a new reality. So I think that we started with the idea I said 2 years ago within a conference when I said civilization reality from a perspective. Now I have many other perspectives with all of you, and I think we need to continue this stage. I said that we're going to have a conference after 1 year or 1 year and a half, but again, it's not only a conference, it's a concept and it's a process, and we could have in a different level. So what I'm looking for, that if the civilization resilience will be within different levels, and then we collect together. If every one of us can have his own, platform for civilization resilience. So I think on that stage, we could have something to be returned. And again, thank you for all of you for this commitment to be here, and have no more words to say. Thank you.
Well, I think we have concluded our 90 minutes. Maybe this is a lesson learned, that maybe next event, whenever we organize something, we have to make it longer to give a chance to our audience. We have really a lot of really great comments coming from all over the places, from Egypt, from Switzerland, from India, from France. Basically, a lot of people have questions, but I understand also it is too late for some people in India, too early for some people in Hawaii, and people would like to break their fasting in Egypt.
Fasting in Egypt.
So I really appreciate your input. And I think there was actually a comments from Dr. Kelman about how we can take this further. We'll try to find a way to continue this dialogue and this discussion further, because there is a lot of input here. It will take time to transcript this meeting and put it into small videos. So basically you can have the lesson learned, but what I'll try to do is share with you a sort of minutes for the point covered by everybody. We are recording this video, so it will be shared also on YouTube and on Facebook if you don't mind. And I will communicate with you this transcript as soon as possible, and hope this is the beginning that we are getting to know. I know we know each other, but also now basically this is a great community. And thank you so much for everything, and I really appreciate your input. And thank you for tuning in here, and thanks for our audience. Really appreciate their input as well. We have a lot of people following us. Thank you.